find the fish. Find the fish. Find the fish. I think we can all agree that finding the fish is the number one most important thing to consistently catching fish, right? Because regardless of if you have a $100,000 boat or all the nicest rods and reels and all the nicest tackle and a million slam shadies, you're not going to catch fish if you're in a dead zone. But the problem is so many of us don't have time to do the scouting and to be on the water every single day like a full-time guide. Well, don't worry. We have you covered. That is why we've come up with our smart fishing game plan. That's every single Friday morning. We put out a 10-minute video that literally shows you where to find the fish in your area. 10 minutes or less. That's all it takes. 10 minutes or less. We will get on satellite maps and actually show you the trends based on weather, based on the tides, and based on what's happening right now to help you go out there and consistently find the honey holes. It's free to all of our Salt Strong Insider members. That's our smart fishing game plan. So if you are a member, make sure to be checking out every Friday morning. We're coming up with a smart fishing game plan. If you're not a member, what the heck are you waiting on? This is just one more benefit on top of the 20 to 30% off all of our tackle, on top of all the how-tos and all the on-the-water reports and all the fishing reports we're putting up every single day, and the amazing community. You will now get the smart fishing game plan completely for free, part of your membership. Go to saltstrong.com to join us today. Here's the episode.
This fishing, it's in my soul.
Welcome to the Salt Strong Podcast, disrupting fishing entertainment as you know it. Prepare to laugh. Prepare to get to know fishing legends in a whole new and unfiltered way. And on occasion, you might even learn a thing or two about fishing. Here's your host, Joe Simons. Like diamonds.
Hello, Salt Strong Nation. Joe Simons, like diamonds. We are back again talking about targeting one species at a time. Why to do it? Why do some of the best pros do that? We're talking about like purposely going out and catching a slam, right? You do it all in one spot. You pick different spots for the certain species. I'll start off with a story. Luke and I were in the financial services industry, and there were two of these financial advisors that we worked with that in everyone's eyes were highly, highly successful. And they both had very different clientele, but it was laser focused. One, and this one, everyone thought they were kind of crazy. It was a husband and wife team, and these are financial advisors. So imagine hearing a radio show or an ad or seeing an ad in a paper about investing with this couple. And they literally said, like over and over again, like this was their pitch publicly, that we only work with conservative, basically like Republican voters who are married and have between $3 and $10 million of investable assets. Okay, that was their target. They were like laser focused, and everyone else thought they were crazy. I thought they were crazy at first. And I became friends with them, and I was like, so you would turn down someone who maybe wasn't married or voted differently or had 11 million or only 2 million? And they said, absolutely. We wouldn't even take them. Don't even want to mess with them. We're so laser focused on this. Like we know those people in and out. We are those people ourselves. We can talk with them. And like, guess what? Guess what kind of referrals we get? And I was like, let me guess. People who are conservative that have between 3 and 10 million are married. Like, exactly. Like we became known as those experts, and we attract people from all over the country that say, oh yeah, I want to work with, I'm not going to mention their names, because they only deal with people just like us. And then another financial advisor only worked with professional athletes. Pretty smart, right? And became known as like the guru for professional athletes. And in most all the other advisors I work with, these two people, I think they worked less and probably made the most money, probably had the less stress because they've literally picked their ideal customers. And everyone else, for the most part, as a financial advisor, they'd say, you know what, I'll work with anyone that has money, right? And this transitions so well over to fishing because the average angler, most anglers, they just want to catch anything that'll bite, right? You go up to a local boat ramp, you see that person on the dock or pier, and many times they got a bucket full of shrimp, like, hey, what are you going for? Anything that'll bite. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's a time and a place for that. But I've also seen it's really interesting that some of the best and people, you know, that are guides and captains and people in tournaments that have to catch a slot red and a slot trout and or a slot snook or a flounder, depending on what tournament, like they're laser focused. They know exactly what spots they're going to go to catch those specific species. And that's like next level. Like that's a whole new game. And so we wanted to do a podcast on that topic. And I don't think this is like the only way to do it. We're not trying to say that. We're going to talk about the pros and the cons to thinking like that and to picking spots based on a species versus just going out there and trying to just get good spots in general based on the trends. So we got Justin, Wyatt, Pat. What's up, guys?
What's up?
So Wyatt, you look like you got some sun today.
Yeah, I went out specifically targeting redfish today. So I spent a lot of time in the sun, up in the shallows, getting beat up, getting sunburnt. So yeah, I'm a little lobstery today.
Well, suspense is killing me. How did it go?
It went pretty well. I found, loads and loads of redfish, but I decided to torture myself and use the fly rod today. Managed to stick a couple, but it's tough. Still learning how to do the hook sets and manage line when fish are running straight at you. But yeah, I guess I'll start off just talking about redfish, just because that's what's just came up. So I think everyone has a misconception about fishing that you need to cast out as far as you can off of a bank to catch big fish. Even when I used to go beach fishing and everything, I would cast out as far as I can. Redfish are one of those species that your best chance is within probably 10, 15 feet of a shoreline. They're a very shallow water focused predator. But you start looking at other species like trout, snook, flounder. Some of those species will hold and actively feed, and I will actively target areas that are 6 foot in depth. So there's a huge shift when I decide I'm going to go after redfish. They're a really shallow water focused approach. I would say probably maybe 2 weeks out of the year in total fishing, I have deep water fishing for reds. But 95% of my year when I'm fishing for reds is up in the shallows in less than 3 feet of water. That's where I find the majority of fish. I'm sure everyone here that's on this call would agree with me. I think you really also have to think about seasonal patterns of each of these fish and which ones you have the best chance of going after during different times of the day, certain times of year. So I'll give you an example of my game plan this morning. I knew the reds weren't going to turn on until later on in the day. Typical winter pattern, those fish don't seem to be super active. When I say those fish, specifically redfish, don't seem to really turn on until about 8, 9, 10 o'clock if the sun's coming out. There's a lot of different factors that are going to influence when those fish start to feed. But on average in the wintertime, those fish get up shallow in, the days where the sun is beating down on the shore. Like the reason I'm sunburned is those fish moved up shallow and I followed them from the deeper water where they weren't feeding. They got up shallow, got on all this mullet, got onto all those shrimp. And that's when you have the best chance with redfish, when they're up shallow feeding. And they have a small window to do that in the wintertime, and then it gets cold again at night and the evening. So that shifts around in the summertime. And I could go on different tangents for each season, but I think just for the purposes of the podcast, I'll stick with what's going on right now. But for reds, it's really a shallow water approach year round. It's just different times of the day you're going to get up in that shallow water. Like summer and spring, for the most part, I'm starting really early in the morning with that top water. And it all changes each season. But right now, it's just getting up shallow, probably around 9, 10, 11 o'clock, depending on when that sun finally does come out. And that's when you're going to see them up there feeding and pretty active in really large schools. I probably saw 100 redfish today, but it was just a matter of actually getting within casting distance of them and not spooking them, because in the winter, they are really, really spooky.
I love it. Justin, I know you used to do a bunch of tournaments. I imagine you had to do some of this one species at a time thinking, right? If you were in a tournament where there was one fish in the line, or you're trying to catch a slam and I got to catch a trout, you're going to start thinking differently than if you were just going out there on a fun recreational day just to catch fish.
Yeah, definitely. If for anybody that's gone out and done tournaments, if you take the time to talk to the guys that placed, top 5 or even top 10 and ask what their strategy was, or you want to learn from that, right off the bat, if I'm going to do a tournament where I have to have one trout and one redfish, like let's say it's a catch, foot, or release tournament, I'm going to go for my trout first thing in the morning. Why? Because they seem to be a little more sensitive to light. And once that sun does creep up past 9:30, generally speaking, for most tournaments in Florida that I did, if I don't have a 20-inch trout, that I've, taken a picture of and have it documented, and it's 9:30, there goes my opportunity. Like, and every minute counts in a tournament. You have to make smart decisions. That's not to say I couldn't stumble upon a 22-inch trout at 1 PM, but I want to maximize my time to do so. And the best time to go for trout is first light. They're more willing to come up and feed on the surface. They're more aggressive. And for some reason, when that sun breaks 9, 10 o'clock in the morning, they may push from a little bit shallower edges to deeper water. And the deeper the water is, especially when you're fishing flats, potholes, things where, there potholes, for example, is the biggest thing that I'm focused on when I go for trout, for example. There's a lot of them, and you have to methodically hit all of them. And the deeper the water gets, the harder it is to effectively target all of those potholes, because you don't know if they're in 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot. They move so much, but they tend to be a little bit shallower and a little more willing to feed early on in the morning. So strategically, that's just what you did. If you wanted to place and you wanted to do well, and it's a numbers game, you go for trout, get your trout done, and then you spend your next 4 hours focusing on getting a redfish. And like Wyatt said, sure, there might be some redfish tailing and happy in the morning, but you're going to have less of an opportunity to catch that nice trout from 9 to noon, but you're still going to have about as equal of an opportunity, sometimes even better if you're sight fishing for them, from that 9 to 12 for redfish. And you got to make those decisions wisely. So yeah, I mean, in a tournament, if you got to go out and you have species specific fish to target, everybody's going to do it different based on their area, based on time of the year. And why we all kind of addressed it on this like pre-con before we got on the call. It's about strategy. It's about your pre-plan. I mean, I said it in a previous podcast with you last year. We talk about tournaments, and I fully believe that success is a formula. It is preparation plus luck. You can't control the luck part, but the more prepared you are, the better chance you are at being successful. So might as well over obsess about all the things that are within your control.
Yep. And all of these different types of fish, even in inshore, feed differently, right? A redfish feeds differently than the trout and feeds differently than a flounder and a snook. And so that's why that strategy part is so critical. And there are going to be some areas, right, that when you do your pre-trip planning, that might contain all 4 of them. You could catch tarpon, right? I mean, you could catch 5, 10 species in one kind of small area. But even if all those fish are there, it helps to know how they feed, right? And that means what lures to use or what even retrieval speed to use. Do you want to be popping off the bottom, or do you want to be using a topwater lure? And then also depends on the season. I mean, this is a big focus of what we do in the Insider Club, right? I mean, it's based on trends. Pat, how do you pre-trip plan? Do you pick out spots based on species, or is it something else?
Typically what I'm going to do, back home, what I used to do was every time I would go out, my goal was to catch an inshore slam, those 3 species, whether it be redfish, trout, snook, tarpon, flounder, anything along those lines. So I did a lot like what Justin does in the tournaments. I almost, verbatim, I knew my best shot at a decent trout is going to be at first light or pre-dawn, before that the sun even breaks. And as soon as I got my trout, and this is something that I'm kind of weird because I really wanted to get that slam. I would actually leave feeding trout to go find my redfish, and because I could sit there and catch 15, 16, 17-inch trout all day, but my goal almost always was to catch that slam. So then I'm going to move to my redfish. So once I found that redfish, I would always wait for the snook to be the latest in the afternoon because I knew I could always skip the mangroves. And that's where I would catch them. But it was in that order: trout, redfish, snook. And that's what I did. And if I couldn't find any snook, I'm hitting a residential canal and going after some juvenile tarpon. But that was my plan almost every single time that I went out. And I made sure that I would pick an area that I knew would hold each one of those fish, depending on the seasonal trends and their feeding activity. So, that if I'm going after juvenile tarpon, then I'm going to want a residential canal or a still water type of canal that didn't have any kind of current flow in it. My trout, I'm going to be looking for, the bigger trout are going to be up against the shoreline. They're going to be in super shallow water, but you need to get there, right when the light is low. And the redfish, as soon as that light comes up, they're going to be tailing, they're going to be cruising, they're going to be pretty easy to spot. So that was my game plan almost every time I went out.
That's good. I mean, what you said is critical in that you left your trout spot, right? Because that's what we're trying to say here is that, and there are areas that can hold all of them, but in many cases, Wyatt mentioned it. I mean, he it wasn't just the time of day; it was also the time of day plus a specific spot he had picked out based on trends and based on his strategy to catch trout first, and then to catch redfish. Walk us through that. What it looks like for you there in Texas, Wyatt. What types of spots in general are you like, all right, this is my redfish spot, or this is my ideal redfish spot versus a trout spot versus a flounder spot?
So yeah, here in Texas, it actually looks a lot like Florida. So any of the advice I'm going to give here in Texas, and Pat can vouch, he's visiting here right now and he's from Florida, looks exactly like, West and East Coast as you move up and down the coastline. So my trout spots typically are always going to be near seagrass. Now, if you go further north in Texas, this can look a little bit different because there's a little bit less grass. But for the majority of the larger trout that I target, you got to have seagrass nearby and high salinity levels. So here in the upper Laguna Madre, you have these giant grass flats that have spoil islands on the borders of them. So what I look for is maximizing structure. You got the grass flat nearby, and then almost always, I think 95% of my good trout spots have a big depth change nearby. And when I say big, it's a very sharp, like from the shallow flats that are 2 to 5 feet deep, and then it drops down to like 10-foot hole, or it drops out to an intercoastal channel, it drops out to the open bay in Corpus Christi, or these dredged out cuts, really, really hard, sharp depth changes. And I think the reason for that is when we look at how a speckled trout feeds, they feed upward. Their jaw hinges upward. They're meant to ambush from below. So they can get up on these flats and they can lay in the potholes. They can lay in the grass, and then their back is literally camouflage for seagrass. Those spots are meant to break up their outline. So they get down low and they feed on the grass flats. Now, say the temperature is not favorable in both summer and winter for them to be shallow feeding, they're going to drop off to that depth change that I talked about, that really, really sharp depth change. And they're going to feed basically sitting lower on that depth change. And as bait comes over that depth change, whether it's, the intercoastal channel or it's a dredged cut or it's a hole, they're going to be laying down in there ready to attack from below. So when you think about where a trout's going to feed, you got to have depth changes nearby, and you got to have slightly deeper water. Very rarely do I see your average size trout in shallow water, but the big gators that we talk about, and they're not terribly common, they will get shallow and feed, but they're usually laying in a pothole on those shallow shorelines, or they're laying behind, some piece of structure, with be it a fallen tree or something of that nature. They're always looking for a depth change that they can ambush from below on. You'll see these trout, and it's almost like they lay down on the bottom and they kind of curl up like a cat. It's weird, but they're always ready to pounce from below. So I'm always looking for seagrass. I'm looking for a depth change and good current flow, because trout like to let their food come to them. I'll talk about this with flounder later on too, but think of a conveyor belt of food. They need a constant flow of food towards them. They don't want to work really hard. So anywhere that breaks up that flow of currents, they don't got to fight it. Anywhere you got the depth change and the seagrass, those are my trout spots. I'm not generally looking on shallow shorelines for them. I'm generally looking a little ways away off those shorelines, maybe at the points or where that island drops off into the intercoastal, and they can sit on the edge of the grass or the channel. Got to have all those ambush spots for those trout. Think ambush predator when it comes to trout.
Well, Justin, what are you laughing about?
Because he called a trout a cat, and all I can think about is like, I'm curious like a cat. That's why my friends call me Whiskers.
You'll see them. They lay on the bottom. Like if you've ever seen a cat curl up on the couch, I swear I've seen trout in a circle on the, like, big ones. They can curl up in a circle on the bottom. I swear I've seen them do it, and they look just like cats. You can quote me on that.
I'll be sure to look for that next time I hover over a pothole in 4 feet. I get it though. It makes perfect sense. Like, and I think I've seen underwater video of how trout feed, how they stage in current. And they can't, I mean, dude, they could totally turn on themselves. I know what you're talking about. I just never heard a trout referred to as a cat. No, it's like, it's changed. Like, you know what? Maybe they do fit that shape. It's just funny.
This is the first thing that came to mind. I'm sorry for my analogy. Maybe a snake is better. A snake might be better.
Anyways, we're derailing. So one thing that I keep hearing from all of this is that it is about types of spots and this pre-planning about why we're choosing this spot over that spot. And I asked you, Wyatt, I said, if you were to go out and you wanted to catch redfish, let's throw back to North Carolina, for example. Okay, let's go back to North Carolina. And I said, you want to go catch a redfish. You've got marshes over here and docks over here. What is your impulse to go fish if you want to catch redfish? Between the two, marsh and dock, what do you go fish?
Every time I'm going to pick marsh. You just think about everything.
And like, I agree with you, but that's like the thing. I think people will be like, well, both are good structure. What both have to hold redfish, and they do, right? But like, why marshes for redfish in particular?
So you think about the way they feed as well. They're an aggressive shallow water feeder. They don't really pounce upward. They really like to pin stuff up against shorelines. They like to pin stuff down against a shallow structure, whether that be mud flat or oyster bar, whatever. They like to pin stuff in shallow water. They're really, really aggressive fish. And we'll use the marsh example. Most of that prey that's up there is, small mullet or crustaceans like crabs or shrimp. And they don't do well feeding in open, deep water because their jaw hinges downward. So unlike a trout, if they've got bait that's swimming above them, they have to now swim up to get on top of that bait to then attack it. If you've ever been fishing topwater for redfish, anybody listening to this, you've probably seen a redfish literally come up out of the water and then come down on top of a plug. It's because that's how they have to feed. So it's not advantageous for them to sit in deeper areas and try and go after bait that's going over their head. Yes, you've probably rolled a paddle tail over one's head and seen it come after it, but chances are it does a level change and it gets up above that paddle tail, then comes down on it. So shallow water feeding, the marshes specifically, most marshes are generally, other than the cuts or creek mouths, 1 to 2, 3 feet in depth. And it's a lot of crustaceans and a lot of small bait fish, and they can pin stuff up against the grass. It's a perfect environment for a redfish to feed in. It's conducive to the way that they feed, Justin, to answer your question. And when you think about all the species we're talking about, the most of them are the environments where their anatomy and the way that they hunt is most available to them.
Good. Marsh boy. Second follow-up question. Do you or don't you put sunscreen on in the marsh?
You absolutely should. Absolutely. But you can also use the marsh mud, and people pay really good money for that in New York. And you can go straight duck hunter.
You're welcome. Wyatt's parents hopefully listen to this one. They're like, Joe, keep hammering him every time he has a sunburn. You got to tell him about the sunscreen.
Put it on.
In the Fish Strong store, there is a neck gaiter that we sell that they work pretty good.
Yeah, they do.
I had one on today. Well, I probably should have pulled it up a little bit higher, but
you're more bronze guy. This blended in. This guy over here is like he kissed the sun. It's not good.
Got caught in a lobster trap.
I kind of want to stay on the dock conversation for a second. So in the wintertime in particular, one of my favorite times, I love hitting docks in the wintertime, specifically for snook. So, snook, and let's compare snook to redfish. Okay. And let's talk about if there are snook in marshes in some parts of Florida. You have some snook down south in the southern part of Texas, Wyatt, that, you're going to go and get on here this year. Targeting snook. We've talked a little bit about trout, talked a little bit about how redfish, their bodies are, how their mouths are, and how they feed. Snook are very, they're very ambush oriented, and they are hyper structure oriented, like Pat mentioned. So, that Hail Mary of skipping up underneath mangroves later on in the day where there's shade and there's cover, those snook aren't covering a lot of ground. Redfish, for example, they'll cruise, they'll follow a perimeter of a marsh or a spoil island shoreline or open grass flats, move from potholes to scavenging on the grass to maybe beating up on some shrimp on the shoreline. Snook don't really do that as much. They can move around, but for the most part, they're going to want to orient themselves hyper tight to structure, mangrove edges and docks. And in the wintertime, docks in general are a little bit deeper than the shorelines where the mangroves are overhanging. So you've got a little bit deeper water where they can get down and relax and feed on a variety of different bait fish, shrimp, pinfish, little mojaras, and they'll hang real tight to the pilings, come out and attack a bait fish and come right back to their holding spot. So they can use that labyrinth to their advantage in how they feed. They I don't know, they do kind of have an underslung jaw, so they can kind of come up and feed easier like a trout does, unlike a redfish that tacks straight on or has to get on top of something like Wyatt mentioned. So they can sit lower in the water column at docks and look above them and come up and feed aggressively. So for anybody that fishes, I think of like the docks around Indian River County, Sebastian, Vero area, Stewart, you can go and you can get trout and snook at those docks. But for every trout and snook you're going to get, every 5 or 10 trout and snook you're going to get, you might get one redfish, just because that type of structure and environment isn't as conducive. The redfish may come by, but they're not going to be nearly as populated as the snook and the trout are going to be around those docks. So the wintertime in particular, love hitting docks for snook. It's just a great ambush spot. There's a lot of bait fish that come through with changing tides, and it's deep water. So they have kind of all the recipe for, what's comfortable to them.
It's good. It reminded me when we kicked off Salt Strong, some of you guys maybe saw some of the videos, but, we spent that entire month on Little Gasparilla Island, and 30 days or 31 days, right? 30 days as of memory, on this island. And, part of the thing was we weren't going to go on land. Like, we literally lived on this island. If you guys know what Little Gasparilla Island is, it's a little barrier island off of Florida. There's no cars. So you have to take a boat there, and there's no Publix, there's no shops, there's no stores. And so we brought a ton of food. And we actually did not get back on the mainland the whole time. And so we were eating a lot of fish. And from day one, our goal was to catch an inshore slam using artificial lures, which was kind of new to us. We were live bait guys. And so it was catch an inshore slam every day with artificial lures. And the first 11 days we did it. And we had different guests come in. And so it was funny. We had picked out certain types of spots. We didn't go to the same spot, but it was almost identical types of spots every day for those 3 species. You guys kind of talked about it. For the trout, it was, and this was the month of March, by the way, down at Little Gasparilla Island near Boca Grande. So for the trout, it was seagrass, Wyatt, with little potholes. Sometimes we'd have to hit little areas where there's slight little channels and cuts. And that's where we could almost always get one or many trout on a little paddle tail. And then for the redfish, it was a lot of the oyster bars around there back in Catfish Creek and Bull Bay, and then points. Mangrove, there are tons of mangroves. It goes on forever. So it was little mangroves and little flats off there. Anytime there's oyster bars, we'd fish the heck out of that. And every day we'd catch, multiple reds. What's funny, Justin, it was different every day, but so many days like we couldn't catch a snook because we had our trout in redfish spot. And for whatever reason, that month of March, like we couldn't consistently find snook. But the one place that we always knew we could catch at least one snook if we just had to catch one snook to complete the slam was docks. There's all those docks there on Little Gasparilla Island, starting from the point that is facing Boca Grande, and we'd start there and just move down. And it was almost always we could knock off a couple of snook on those docks. And worst case, we'd go back up to Boca Grande and fish some of those docks. But it was like clockwork. But we never caught trout or redfish ever, like under those docks. It was always snook. Very, very odd. And I know it changes per season and stuff. And we have caught reds in the past on some of those docks, but that time period, it was only snook. So it is interesting. Pat, like you're in a new area. I'd love to hear your thoughts, because that to me would be an excuse to not think like this, to not think, all right, I got to have one spot for one species. I want to catch some fish. But are you? How are you planning when you're in a brand new state, brand new area that you have no idea on how to fish it, minus the trends and things that you're getting from the Insider Club?
So, what's funny is, and Wyatt said it earlier about the Laguna Madre looks like, Florida, the east and west coast. You could take the Indian River and make it 4 times wider, and you pretty much got the Laguna Madre. You got the Spoil Islands, you've got the grass flats, you've got, shallow water pretty much everywhere except for the main intercoastal channel that comes through. So even though, it's in a different state, it fishes really similar to what I'm used to back home. And, we talked about it earlier. The most important thing is following the trends. So what's the trends right now? Down here in South Texas, it's pretty much I mean, we're early spring right now. I mean, the temperatures have been in the 70s. When these fronts come through, we get a lot of wind, but the temperature doesn't drop. So what the fish are doing here is they're not pulling all the way down into these deep channels. They're only pulling as far as the transitional potholes that are 4 and 5 foot deep. So in the morning time, I'm hitting those up. And then as the sun comes up, like Wyatt said, I mean, he's pinpointed it about 9:30. You start seeing tails pop up on the shallow flats, and that's when we start moving up. So basically what I'm doing here is I'm following the trends and what I know and using the patterns of, if I'm looking for a trout, then I'm going to go the deeper drop off grass flats. If I'm looking for a redfish, I'm going to move shallower in the potholes, and I'm still looking for my snook. So I've heard they're all up in the Brownsville shipping channel, but I got to dodge barges to fish that. I'm still trying to figure that out. But literally, it's no different just because I'm in a different zip code than where I'm normally fishing. Even when I was in Louisiana, I'm still following the trends of what that is. In Louisiana, it was wintertime, it's straight up winter pattern. So, that bite was, you late start, don't worry about getting out there first thing in the morning. And as the sun warms up those marsh flats, you get up in the skinniest, muddiest water you can find. And that's where the fish was. So it's still, a redfish is a redfish, a trout is a trout. There might be a little bit of difference between, the execution of it, but you're still looking for the same kind of areas. I'm still looking, here, I am looking for flats that have some drop offs and got some grass flats, but where I'm fishing on that flat is pretty much spring patterns. And that's what I've been doing here. And it's been pretty successful. I really, I've been able to find fish in each one of the states that I've been fishing now, just following, what we teach here and following trends.
So, follow-up question to all you guys, assuming you were in, let's just say, a tournament or a time where you were targeting a specific species at a specific spot, are you changing up your lure for a specific species? Or are you sticking with one confidence lure for the whole stinking day?
I'm probably changing my lure.
Okay.
If I'm fishing for a trophy trout first thing in the morning, depending on the trends and the situations, I might throw a topwater. I like topwater, big plugs for big trout. If I'm going to be fishing for redfish, and again, depending on what season this is, I'm probably going to switch to a jerkbait. And then if it's, skipping the mangroves of the docks, I'm talking about skipping a power prawn or a slam shading, a paddle tail underneath the mangroves. That's probably what my plan would be. And again, that's going to be depending on trends. If it's wintertime and we just had a cold front that comes through, I'm probably going to stick with one lure that's going to bounce the bottom.
So I'll go next. I would say it's going to depend on the season. Spring and fall, those are two really big bait seasons. So spring, you've got all the shad that show up. Pretty much everything I'm throwing is 2 to 3 inches, just because that's the most prevalent bait. And I'll catch big fish on the small bait. I'll catch little fish on the small bait of all species, just because that's what they're all dialed in on. That's what they're used to eating. They'll take it with no hesitation. Fall, it's big mullet. So I'm throwing my bombers. I'm throwing my big 5-inch jerk shads. I'm throwing big topwaters, anything that represents those big mullet. Now, summer and winter, I will change baits depending on species. For example, I published a weighting report. By the time this podcast goes live, there should be a video, but I caught a full slam on the bomber. But if you noticed, when I really started getting into the reds, I downsized. I find that in the wintertime, reds really dial in on crustaceans more. And there's a lot less mullet around, but the big trout that I go after, they're always where the big mullet are. So you really got to play by what species you're after and where you're fishing. So, generally those shallow waters, you're going to have the small crustaceans and things like that. But you don't have finger mullet that are jumping around in the winter. So the 4-inch paddle tail, is not really super conducive for the trout or the red fishing. But, the 3-inch paddle tail, pretty good choice for reds. The bomber 5-inch paddle tail, really good choice for those trout that are sticking with the really big hog leg mullet. So I'll change it around, and there's a whole nother scenario for summer too, but I want to let Justin give his answer because I'm very curious as to what he has to say.
Well, I just have them all tied on to different setups. So I don't cut and retie at all. Like I am a 3 setup minimum person anywhere that I go fish. And year round, with the exception of winter, topwater for trout, unless the big ones are missing it and they're smart. Then I'll switch over to a bomber, a bigger paddle tail. I just want to go the biggest. If I'm going to go for trout, I want a big trout. I don't want a peanut 16-inch trout, which are great. I love you and respect you, but I want your 24-inch bigger brother. So I'm going to throw a bomber.
Sister, mom.
Sister, mom. Yeah, no, I'm biased. It's fine. And I think the biggest thing is depth coverage. So if we talked about all these different species and different types of structure, different areas, top water for trout is probably my general go-to most of the year, unless it's crazy cold. Bombers can universally work well for all three species in different areas, but I'll throw a bomber if I'm getting short strikes from the top water for trout, which happens like 50% of the time. And then my third setup will be something really natural presentation. So I'll go back and forth between a Slam Shady 2.0 and a Gold Digger. And those are specifically like my confidence lures for sight fishing in grass, in shallow water scenarios. Every day is different. If I'm going for redfish, if I'm going for snook, if I'm going for trout, and I'm going shallower later on in that morning time period, sometimes it's Slam Shady, sometimes it's Gold Digger. I recently did really well on Gold Digger for trout in crystal clear water and super high, aggressive, really sunny day. And the Gold Digger blended in with the grass really well, and I pulled out a whole bunch of trout. But sometimes I'll take a Gold Digger and do it weedless and bounce it on bottom for redfish. Sometimes I'll go to a dock, and when it's freezing cold out and I go for snook, I'll take a Gold Digger, I'll pop the tail off, use like a Pro Shroom Z-Man, jig head, and I'll bounce it real tight to the docks and look like a little tiny bait fish bouncing near the dock. So it mixes. I mean, I'd say, yeah, we all have different lures for different species, but generally, those are the three for me. A power prawn's kind of the ace in the hole, but I know that's like, if this is like laying out the foundation, then the power prawn is like the art of conducting. I mean, there's so many different ways to work it. Like, there's no wrong way to work the prawn. But that's kind of that's my aim in my, my back pocket. I'll grab a prawn if nothing else works.
The power prawn, and new power prawns coming pretty soon. New jig heads, new weedless hooks for those bad boys. I'm pumped,
dude. I want to tease it so bad. They look pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm pumped. Power prawn USA and power prawn Slam Shady.
Oh, so I did see those. Oh my god!
Yeah, that
looks so good. Oh man.
Yeah, I'm pretty pumped. Yeah, so if you guys have missed it, we talked about it on a prior podcast, but this power prawn is, one that is ours, meaning, we developed this entire mold that's taken almost a year and finally all complete. And it is awesome. I can't wait for you guys to see it. And especially when you combine it with these Haas hooks that we have, and even the mushroom ones you're talking about, kind of like those Ned rig style of jig heads, man, it's deadly. And we'll have a whole video series on how to rig it and how to use them to catch more fish. But that's what Luke's, for the most part, been using the last 3-4 months. I mean, every time I fish with him, I was like, you forget about Slam Shady? He's like, well, man, we need to get a Slam Shady power prawn so I can use power prawn and Slam Shady. I was like, I like that. It's gonna be.
I can't wait to try the power prawn on the Magnum Pro Shrooms jig heads. Justin, you said those came in. Yeah, I can't wait. That's going to be a setup. That's going to be killer.
Yeah, the perfect fit. It's a good setup.
Yep. Cool, guys. Anything else on this topic that you think of?
Oh, we never talked about Flounder.
Ooh,
how did we forget about Flounder? The good news. I'll make this one quick because they are really the easiest species. I think personally, flounder are, when you think of flounder spots, there are 100% flounder spots. And I think the easiest one for any inshore angler to go after and find is look for marshes and find where those marshes dump out. So outgoing tides are king for flounder. And this is really, with the exception of winter, you can catch flounder in this spot any time of year. Winter, they're offshore breeding for the most part. But find a creek mouth or where an entire marsh dumps out on an outgoing tide. Throw whatever your presentation is, whether it's a power prawn or a paddle tail. I'm partial to the Slam Shady. and I'll throw it, up current, up into the creek mouth, bounce it out. They always lay on the bottom. So you need to use a really heavy jig head, that Pro Shrooms or, a 1/4 ounce trout eye, whatever heavy jig head you want to use, and have that on the bottom. As you bounce that out, those flounder typically sit just down current of that creek mouth. Again, conveyor belts of food. They're waiting for all the bait to come out of the marsh. It's conducive for them to lay on the bottom and let that bait come out of that marsh straight to them. They jump up and grab it every single time. I wouldn't recommend doing a fast retrieve for them because it's going to keep it out of their strike zone. If you do the twitch, pause, it'll take that lure up and then bring it back down, and they'll be able to see it from further out rather than swimming it slow over their head where they might have a quick second to see it. But I think they're the easiest fish in the world. When I lived in North Carolina, there's a lot of marshes over there. That was my confidence fish to go out and make sure I didn't get skunked on. I just go hit creek mouths on outgoing tide, twitch, pause, twitch, pause. You can pick, one or two flounder out of almost every single creek mouth there, it seemed like. So that's flounder in a nutshell. Find an outgoing tide spot where they're going to be sitting waiting for food to come out of somewhere.
Well, it's a fact. Wyatt loves marshes. Marsha.
It's my mud skincare routine that I really fall in love with there.
Oh, Marsha. Cool. Do we forget any other species that you guys want to cover?
I think we're good.
Cool. I think the last thing that everyone should do is join the Inside Club. Does anyone agree? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Yeah, we talk about it pretty much on every single podcast. And there's two ways to go about becoming a better angler. One is to do it by yourself, aka the lone wolf. I wouldn't recommend that. That's many years of trial and error. Why not take shortcuts, right? I mean, why not invest in yourself? Just like if you want to get good at anything in life, Justin wants to be a better guitar player. He's probably smarter if he invests in an online course or goes and gets a professional guitarist to teach him how to play guitar versus just sitting there strumming away, hoping and praying he's going to hit some good chords. It shocks me. Even looking back at my own journey of fishing, how stubborn we are, especially as men. I know that we have a lot of men who listen, and we're stubborn. We don't want to ask directions. We want to do it ourselves, and we want to get out there and just have the time on the water to figure it out. And I disagree with that. I mean, the time on the water is awesome. It's more enjoyable to me when I'm catching more fish. So if that's you and you want to maximize your time, if you're a busy person, you value your time, then we'd love to have you in the club. I believe you will find it incredibly helpful, that you will see your game increase regardless if you've never caught a fish or if you're trying to catch your first inshore slam or your new PB, or even if you're on the water every day. We've got anglers in our club that do fish every day, and they're some of the most helpful and giving. And that's been real neat, right? I mean, all of you have been in and out of this club, both as an employee of Salt Strong and without being an employee. And you could see just how helpful. There's something different about it. People call it a family. It is so incredibly helpful. And we're trying to boil everything down into like short and sweet tips and shortcuts for you. Right. Even Luke's Smart Fishing Game Plan. And I know some of their coaches are going to start doing their own little game plans for certain regions. That is so helpful. So it's 10 minutes. If you can just afford 10 minutes every Friday or even every weekend and just watch that one video alone, you will have an edge and an advantage over the fish and other fishermen. So I challenge you to come in there. And of course, we have discounts, amazing community, all kinds of on the water reports that fishing coaches are going to fishing new spots every single week. So Monday through Friday, we do a new one. It's 5 a week. And we have a whole library of past reports and how it ties in with the trends. So incredibly helpful. And so it comes down to 27 cents per day. If you can't afford that, that means you're probably not drinking coffee or eating. But if you actually do eat and maybe even drink coffee now and then, we'd love to have you. 27 cents per day, comes to $97 for the year. And it has an unheard of guarantee. What happens, Wyatt, if someone doesn't see value in the club?
We not only give you your money back, but we double it.
Oh, smokes. That's crazy. I mean, don't you wish all companies treated you like that? Not a 30-day guarantee. Anyone could do that. Not a 60-day guarantee. Come on. You kidding me? 365-day, 100% money back guarantee. And we've had a couple people take us up on it. and didn't ask questions. One guy just said, hey, I love he literally said, I love you guys so much. I've learned so much, but I'm in financial trouble. I really need the money. If you can, and I'll join back later. Cool. There's your $97 back. He did not get the double because he's, that's if we wasted your time. He was obviously very nice and he felt horribly guilty, but we do. It's no questions asked. And if you do think we wasted your time, we'll give you double for wasting your time. That's how confident we are. It will work for you, that you'll save time and you'll save money. So join us if you haven't already. For those of your current members, thank you guys so much. Got some really cool stuff coming for you, including the new power prawns, some new custom rods are finally happening here sooner than later. A lot of new reels coming in the shop at fishstrong.com. That's the tackle store. And then saltstrong.com is where you go to join the actual Insider Club. So hope to see you guys in there. And certainly the most helpful community in this planet, maybe the whole solar system. Definitely, if you haven't been in a while, go check it out. We've made some cool new changes. That's community.saltstrong.com. Everyone else, thank you so much. And depending on where you are, leave a comment. Let us know how we did. Let us know if you have any thoughts on this. This is a little bit different one, but it's come up internally a couple of times. Like, hey, let's just do a podcast on it about the pros and cons of targeting one species in kind of one spot at a time. So that was good, guys. Good, helpful stuff. Thank you, Mr. Marsha. Hi, guys. Peace. We out. Whoop, whoop.
'Cause fishing, it's in my soul.